She disappeared 10 years ago. No goodbye, no trace, no reason he could understand. And tonight, in a shabby seafood restaurant by the sea, Damien Vale, the man Chicago trembles at the mention of, sees her carrying broken dishes as if 10 years had never happened. But before he can say a word, gunmen appear. And Damien realizes that Evelyn isn't just running away from her past. She's carrying something the entire underworld wants, even if it means killing her. Like and comment the city you're watching to let me know how far this story has progressed. Now, let's begin. The night Evelyn Cross disappeared, it was raining so hard the gutters on Harborview Street ran black. Damien Vale remembered that detail with a precision that had nothing to do with sentiment. He remembered it the way a man remembers the exact sound of a bone breaking. Not because he wanted to, but because some things burned themselves into the body and never let go. 10 years, 4 months, 11 days. He'd stopped counting the hours sometime around year 3, when counting felt like something a weaker man would do, and Damien Vale had made a decision early on that he was not going to be a weaker man. Not about this, not about anything. He'd built an empire on that decision. The black SUV rolled through the coastal town of Harwick just past 7 in the evening, moving slow on wet asphalt that caught the headlights wrong and threw them back in fractured angles. Damien sat in the rear seat with his jacket still buttoned, one hand resting on his knee, watching the storefronts go by through glass that needed cleaning. His associate Marcus Teal sat across from him with a folder open on his lap, talking about projected ROI on the waterfront acquisition, talking about square footage and zoning disputes, and something about a historic preservation ordinance that was going to be a problem. Damien heard about 40% of it. The rest of his attention was somewhere he didn't want it to be. "You're not listening," Marcus said. "I'm listening." "You haven't looked at the folder." "I don't need to look at the folder. The building's worth it, or it isn't. That's what you're here to tell me." Marcus closed the folder with the careful patience of a man who had learned not to push. He was 43, slight, with gray starting at his temples, and eyes that had seen enough of Damien's world to know when silence was the smarter move. He'd been with Damien for 6 years, long enough to understand that the quiet that settled over his employer sometimes wasn't peace, it was pressure. The SUV slowed. "This is it," said the driver, a man named Cole, who spoke maybe 20 words a day and earned his salary by saying the right ones at the right time. Damien looked out the window. Carver's Catch. The sign was lit with 2 letters burned out, CRVRSCTCH, in pale yellow neon against a facade that had once been painted white and was now the color of old chalk. The building sat at the edge of the pier, half of it technically hanging over the water on support beams that had probably been inspected during a previous decade. Fishing nets decorated the windows. A hand-lettered board outside advertised the daily special in orange marker, chowder and haddock, $11. "You want to buy this building?" Marcus said. "I want to buy the property. The pier's rotting. Piers can be rebuilt." He pushed the door open before Cole had fully stopped the vehicle. The cold air off the water hit him across the face, salt and diesel and the low, particular smell of tidal mud that only existed at this latitude, in this season. And Damien Vale stood on the wet sidewalk for a moment with his hands loose at his sides, breathing it in. Behind him, Marcus climbed out and straightened his jacket. Cole stayed with the car. The restaurant's front door had a small bell above it that rang when Damien pushed through. The inside was exactly what the outside had promised. Maybe 14 tables, half of them occupied. Low lighting from fixtures that were trying too hard to be nautical. A bar along the left wall with stools that didn't match, and a chalkboard behind it listing drinks that were mostly domestic beer, and one wine that had probably been selected by throwing a dart at a catalog. The floor was wood, actual wood, worn smooth in the paths where waitstaff had been walking the same routes for years. Someone had hung black and white photographs along the right wall. Fishing boats. Dock workers. A lighthouse in fog. A hostess appeared from somewhere with a laminated menu and a smile that wanted to be welcoming but landed somewhere closer to tired. "Just 2?" "2," Damien said. She led them to a table near the window. Through the glass, Damien could see the dock extending out over water that was black and choppy in the evening wind. Seagulls were fighting over something at the far end of the pier. A light on a buoy blinked orange at intervals. Marcus picked up his menu immediately. Damien set his down without opening it. A waitress appeared. She was coming from the kitchen, moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that meant she'd been doing this long enough to stop thinking about it. Tray balanced on her left forearm, coffee pot in her right hand, eyes already tracking the room for which table needed attention first. Her hair was darker than he remembered, cut shorter. She was wearing a uniform that was one size too large and shoes that had seen better years. There was a small scar along her jaw that hadn't been there before, but the way she moved hadn't changed. The slight tilt forward when she walked, like she was always just barely leaning into whatever came next. The way her right hand stayed slightly extended even when she wasn't carrying anything, a habit she'd had since she was 22 and had never fully explained. Damien stopped breathing. Evelyn Cross, who had been dead to the world for 10 years, 3 months, and however many days he'd stopped counting, was 12 feet away from him, topping off someone's coffee with the automatic courtesy of a woman who needed the tips. She hadn't seen him yet. For exactly 4 seconds, Damien sat completely still. His hands were on the table. He could feel his own pulse in his fingertips, which was not something that usually happened to him. Men in his position, men who had built what he'd built, who had done what he'd done to build it, did not typically feel their own heartbeats from the outside. Adrenaline was an old acquaintance by now. Pressure was the water he swam in. He had personally sat across a table from a federal prosecutor who had 47 pages of evidence and gotten up 3 hours later without being charged with anything. None of that had made his hands feel like this. She turned. It was the coffee pot that did it. She was swinging back toward the kitchen, and her eyes, doing the automatic sweep of the room that all waitstaff learned, moved across the tables one by one and landed on him the way a skipping stone lands on water. She stopped. The coffee pot stayed level. That steadiness was the only thing that told him she'd had practice managing shock, because everything else on her face went through at least 3 different expressions in the space of a second, and then locked down. Hard. The way a vault locks. The way a woman locks things who has spent years practicing exactly that. "Evelyn," he said. Her jaw moved. Nothing came out. "I need you to—" "Don't." Her voice was low, controlled. The word landed like a finger pressed flat against a surface. She was not going to scream. She was not going to run. Both of those facts told him more about what the last 10 years had done to her than anything else could have. She walked to his table the way someone walks towards something they've already decided they're not afraid of. She set the coffee pot down on the table without being asked. She put both hands flat on the surface and leaned in close enough that he could see the small scar was older than it looked, healed over pale, and he hated himself for noticing. "My name is Claire Bennett," she said. Quiet, precise. "I work here. I live here. You have the wrong person." "You have a birthmark behind your left ear," Damien said. "You bite the inside of your left cheek when you're angry. You were afraid of boats until you were 19. You can't sleep on your right side." Something flickered across her face. She was better at controlling it than she used to be. She shut it down faster. But it was there. "I'm going to need you to leave," she said. "Claire." The owner's voice came from behind the bar, a broad man with a gray beard named Walt, who ran this place and who was looking at Damien with the particular expression of someone who didn't know what exactly he was looking at, but knew it didn't belong in his restaurant. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said, without turning. "Gentlemen, can I start you with drinks?" Marcus, who had understood approximately nothing of what had just happened except that it was significant, picked up his menu and said, "Just water for me." Damien said nothing. He sat back. Let the moment stretch. Let her have the space of pretending, because pushing her right now would make her run, and running was the one thing she could do that he couldn't stop in the middle of a public restaurant without becoming something he was genuinely trying not to be tonight. So he picked up his menu. He ordered the chowder when she came back 30 seconds later with 2 glasses of water she set down with perfectly steady hands. He watched her move back through the room. Marcus leaned forward. "Who is she?" "Someone I used to know." "Should I—" "Drink your water, Marcus." He gave her 20 minutes. Let her take orders, carry plates, refill coffee at 2 other tables. Let her breathe and recalibrate and do whatever she needed to do to convince herself she had this under control. Then he caught her eye when she was passing with a tray of empty bowls and held it just long enough. She came to the table. She didn't want to. He could see that in the extra half-second she took before redirecting. "Check," she said. "Sit down." "I'm working." 5 minutes. "I'm not—" "Evelyn." He said it quietly. He didn't say it like a threat. He didn't need to. The name itself was the weight. "Please." She sat. Not across from him, in the chair beside Marcus, angled away from the room so her back was to most of the other customers. Her hands went in her lap. She held herself very still. "I'm not going back," she said. "Whatever you think, I'm not here to take you back anywhere." "Then why are you here?" "I told you. Investment property. I didn't know you were here." She studied him. She'd always been able to read him better than most people, better than people who had known him twice as long and spent twice as much time trying. It was part of what had made her dangerous to him, even before everything else. She could find the crack in whatever he was projecting, and she'd press her thumb into it without even realizing she was doing it. "You didn't know," she repeated. "No." "How long have you been looking?" He didn't answer that. She looked away, out the window at the dock and the black water beyond it. A muscle in her jaw worked once, twice. 10 years, she said to the glass. Not a question. "Claire." Walt appeared at the edge of the dining room. "Table 6 needs a reset." "1 minute," she said. She pushed back from the table, stood, looked at Damien with an expression that was doing too many things at once, old fury and something raw underneath it, something she hadn't finished building walls around yet. "I want you to leave," she said. "I want you to finish your chowder and leave and not come back." "People are watching this building," he said. She stopped. 2 men, dark sedan parked on Harbor Street since before we arrived. They were there when we pulled up. They're still there. He watched her face. "You want to tell me that's normal for Harwick?" She didn't say anything. "Whoever's been following you," Damien said, "they're going to make a move soon. Tonight, maybe. And they don't know who I am yet, which means we still have a window." "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know what a surveillance team looks like. I've paid enough of them." He leaned forward slightly. "Evelyn, I know you're angry. I know you have every right to be angry. I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I'm asking you to not be dead." Walt appeared again, this time at the table itself. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," Damien said without looking up from Evelyn's face. "Claire." Walt's voice had shifted. "You all right?" "I'm fine, Walt." She still hadn't moved. Her eyes were still on Damien, working through something, calculating in the way she'd always calculated, quickly and without showing her work. "Give me a few minutes." Walt didn't love it, but he retreated. Marcus had developed a sudden deep interest in his water glass. "What do you want from me?" she said. "Nothing," Damien said. "I want to get you out of here before those 2 men decide to stop watching and start moving. That's all." "And then what? Chicago? Your world again?" "Everything I spent 10 years— I don't have a plan past tonight," he said. "I'm telling you what I see. You do what you want with it." She turned her head to the window and looked at Harbor Street. From this angle, she couldn't see the sedan directly, but she looked anyway, and something in her posture shifted so slightly that only someone who had memorized her once would have caught it. A settling. A resignation that wasn't defeat. More like a woman making a choice she'd been hoping to avoid for long enough that she'd started hoping she'd never have to make it. "I have a break in 45 minutes, she said. "That's 45 minutes, we—" The window exploded inward. The blast came from outside. A percussion that hit the chest before the ears, that threw glass across 3 tables and dropped 2 customers out of their chairs and sent Damien sideways out of his seat in a reflexive move before his brain had fully caught up with what his body already knew. He hit the floor and was up again in the same second, reaching across the table for Evelyn's arm, already pulling her down as the second round came through the wall high and left and punched through the chalkboard above the bar, screaming, tables going over. Walt was down behind the bar with his hands over his head, which was exactly what Walt should be doing. Marcus had gone flat on the floor with the professional competence of a man who had been in exactly this kind of situation before and was neither surprised nor particularly distressed by it. Damien had Evelyn by the arm. She wasn't pulling away. "Back," he said. "Kitchen. Move." They moved. The third shot came through the front door as they cleared the kitchen threshold. Damien felt it part the air 6 inches from his ear, which was close enough that he heard the specific frequency of displaced atmosphere that a round makes when it passes at speed. And then they were through the kitchen, and a dishwasher was pressing himself flat against the industrial sink, and a cook was already out the back door, and the alley behind the restaurant was cold and dark and smelled like old grease and salt water. Damien stopped, pressed his back to the wall, listened. 2 shooters outside, maybe 3. The angle of the shot suggested they'd been positioned on Harbor Street and on the dock itself, which meant they'd anticipated the back exit or they had another team. "The camera," Evelyn said. He turned. She was breathing hard but controlled, back against the opposite wall, and she was looking at a small bag she'd grabbed on the way through the kitchen, the kind of thing a woman keeps close enough to grab without thinking. From inside it, she was pulling out a battered 35mm camera, the old kind, film, with a leather case worn soft at the edges. "I've had this for years," she said. I just kept it. It was from the night in Boston. I found it in the water after I ran. I don't even know why I kept it, but I—" "Drop it," he said. "No." Her voice was steadier than it should have been. "I think this is why they're here. I think this is why they've been here. I think this has always been what they wanted, and I've just been the thing standing next to it." From the front of the restaurant, the sound of boots on broken glass. "We'll figure out what's on it later," Damien said. He reached out, took her arm again. Not rough, but not gentle either, the grip of someone who wasn't asking. "Right now we need to move." She went, but she held on to the camera, and as Damien pulled her into the dark of the alley with gunfire still echoing off the wet walls of Harwick's waterfront, one thought moved through him with the slow certainty of something he'd been carrying for 10 years without knowing its full weight. Whatever was inside that camera, people were already dying for it. And now Evelyn was the only person in the world who had it, which meant the men who wanted it weren't going to stop until she was gone, and the man who had spent a decade building an empire to find her was going to have to decide, in the next 60 seconds, exactly how far he was willing to go to keep her alive. Phần 2 sẽ tiếp tục từ điểm này. Damien đưa Evelyn khỏi Harwick, sự thật về đêm Boston dần hé lộ, và chiếc máy ảnh tiết lộ bí mật làm rung chuyển cả đế chế của anh. The alley behind Carver's Catch was 12 feet wide and smelled like the inside of a drain. Damien moved fast but not panicked. There was a difference, and the difference mattered because panic made noise and noise got people killed. He had Evelyn 2 steps ahead of him, his hand on the small of her back, not guiding so much as staying in contact, keeping the circuit closed because the one thing he was not going to do was lose her again in the dark. Not after 10 years. Not after tonight. She wasn't fighting him. That was something. The alley ran north toward a cross street that would put them parallel to Harbor. Wrong direction. Harbor was where the sedan had been sitting, where at least one of the shooters had set up the initial angle. South meant the dock itself, which was exposed, which was wet, which was a kill box if anyone had eyes on the water, which left the service road that cut behind the fish processing warehouse 2 buildings down, a gap in the fence line that Damien had noted from the SUV window on the way in because he always noted gaps in fence lines. It was a habit that had saved his life 4 times that he could count, and an unknown number of times that he couldn't. Marcus materialized from the kitchen door behind them. He had a phone in one hand and a cut above his eyebrow from the window glass that was bleeding in a thin line down the side of his face. He didn't mention it. "Cole's moving the car," Marcus said quietly. 3 minutes, east side of the processing building. 2, Damien said. Cole says 3. "Tell Cole 2 or he's walking back to Chicago." Marcus typed with his thumb. They moved. Evelyn kept pace without being told. That told him something. She'd learned to run. Not the panicked sprint of someone overtaken by fear, but the controlled movement of someone who had thought about running in advance, who had rehearsed it in the back of her mind the way people who'd been through something real rehearsed things. She had one hand wrapped around the leather strap of the camera bag, and she was breathing through her nose, and her shoes were wrong for this. Service shoes, flat-soled, slightly too large, but she wasn't stumbling. They hit the fence. Damien found the gap, bent chain link that someone had never gotten around to fixing, and pushed through first, checked the service road in both directions, then reached back for her arm. She took his hand, just for the 3 seconds it took to get through the fence. Then she let go. The processing building's east wall gave them cover. Damien pressed back against the corrugated metal and listened. Behind them, from the direction of the restaurant, he could hear shouting. Walt's voice, probably, or customers, or both. And then sirens starting up somewhere distant, which meant someone had called 911 and local law enforcement was on its way, which gave them maybe 8 minutes before the street was complicated in a different way. He could also hear, closer than he wanted, the sound of someone moving on the dock side of the alley. Unhurried, methodical, professional. Marcus heard it too. His eyes went to Damien's face. Damien held up 2 fingers, pointed south, shook his head once. Marcus understood. 2 of them. South approach. Don't go that way. Headlights swung across the service road from the north. Cole brought the SUV in without the lights on until the last moment, which was either very smart or very stupid depending on who else was in the road, and tonight it was smart. The vehicle stopped. Back door swung open from inside. Go, Damien said. Evelyn looked at the SUV, looked at him. 3 seconds of calculation that he could almost watch happening. The weighing, the old anger against the new immediate reality, the assessment of which threat was larger right now and which one she could deal with later. She got in the car. Damien followed. Marcus took the front. Cole had them moving before the door was fully shut, rolling north without headlights for another block before he turned them on and merged onto the coastal highway headed away from Harwick's center. The inside of the SUV was very quiet. Evelyn sat against the far door with the camera bag in her lap, both hands flat on top of it. She was looking out the window at the dark coastline going by. Her breathing had evened out. The uniform she was wearing, the one a size too large, pale blue with a small embroidered anchor above the breast pocket, looked wrong against the leather interior, against the tinted glass, against all of it. Damien watched her and didn't say anything. It was Marcus who finally broke it, because Marcus understood that sometimes someone else had to be the one to start a room. Are you hurt? She looked at him like she was noticing him for the first time. No. There's a first aid kit under the seat if... I said no. Marcus nodded and turned back to face front. Another mile of coastline. The sirens behind them were fading. Cole drove at exactly 4 miles over the speed limit, which was the speed at which a vehicle on a coastal highway at night attracted no particular attention. Where are we going? Evelyn said. Safe house, Damien said. 40 minutes north. Your safe house. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. I don't want to be in your safe house. I know. Then tell me what you want instead and I'll make it happen if I can. But right now the options are the safe house or the side of this road. She turned from the window and looked at him directly for the first time since the kitchen. Her eyes were dark in the low light, and there was something in them that was beyond anger, something older and more settled, like anger had lived there long enough to become geography. You said you didn't know I was here. I didn't? But you knew I was alive. He met her eyes. Yes. How long? 14 months. She processed that. Her jaw tightened by a degree. 14 months, she said, and you didn't... I was waiting. For what? For it to be safe. She laughed. It was a short, involuntary sound with no warmth in it. That's... She stopped herself, started over. For 14 months, you knew where I was, and you left me serving tables in a town no one's ever heard of because you were waiting for it to be safe. The people looking for you were still active. If I'd moved toward you... So instead, you just watched. I kept a team at a distance. Passive surveillance, nothing that would... You had people watching me. Her voice had gone very flat. For how long before the 14 months? Damien didn't answer. She looked at him and something in her expression shifted. Not toward anger, which was already there, but toward something more precise, more considered. The face of a woman doing math and not liking the sum. "How long, Damien?" "6 years," Marcus said quietly from the front. Evelyn turned to look at the back of Marcus's head. Marcus kept his eyes on the road ahead. "6 years," she said. "I found you 8 years in," Damien said. He stopped. Restarted. This was not a conversation he'd rehearsed because he'd never let himself rehearse it, because rehearsing it meant believing it would happen, and he hadn't been able to afford that particular hope. "I know how it sounds." "Do you?" "I know what it sounds like, and I'm not asking you to—" "6 years," she said again. Not loud, just precise, like she was setting the number down somewhere solid so she could look at it clearly. "6 years you knew where I was. 6 years I thought—" She stopped. The car moved through the dark. "What did you think?" he asked. She turned back to the window. "That you were dead," she said. "For the first 2 years I thought you were dead. Then I stopped thinking about it." That landed somewhere in Damien's chest in a way that he didn't have a word for and wasn't going to look at closely right now. He'd learned that about himself. There were certain things you looked at directly and certain things you kept in your peripheral vision because looking at them straight on cost too much when you still had work to do. The safe house was a property he'd acquired 3 years ago through a shell company that had no traceable connection to his name or to any of the names adjacent to his operations. It sat on a bluff above a private cove, a converted fisherman's cottage that had been updated with the kind of utilities and security systems that cost more than the building itself was worth. He kept it because the coast was useful and because he'd always had the particular superstition of men in his position, that a door you could go through that no one knew about was worth any price. Cole pulled up the gravel drive and cut the engine. Inside, the cottage was low-ceilinged and smelled faintly of cedar and salt. Damien hit the lights while Marcus checked the perimeter by habit. Evelyn walked in and stood in the middle of the main room and looked around at it the way a woman looks at a place when she's deciding whether it's a shelter or a trap and hasn't made up her mind yet. "Sit down," Damien said. "I'll stand." He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table anyway, sat down himself, put his hands on the table where she could see them. "Tell me about the camera." She looked at the bag still in her hands. Her thumbs moved over the leather strap. "It was at the dock," she said, "the night in Boston, when I ran. I know what happened that night." "Do you?" "I know what you saw." "You know part of what I saw." She set the bag on the table but didn't open it, didn't sit. "I saw Caruso's men execute a federal witness on Pier 11. I saw the man giving the orders. I saw his face." She looked at Damien steadily. "And then I saw you." The room was quiet. "You were there," she said. "You got there 10 minutes after it happened, and you didn't find me. And by morning I was gone, and you never—" Her voice caught, not on emotion, but on something more like controlled pressure, the sound of a woman managing the weight of a very old wound. "I spent a long time trying to decide if you'd sent those men." "Evelyn, I know," she said. "I know it wasn't you. I know that now. I've known it for years. It's still—" She stopped, looked at the camera bag. "It still took me years to know it." Damien said nothing. There was nothing to say to that would make it smaller. "The camera was floating near the dock pilings," she said. "I grabbed it because I was in the water and I needed something to hold on to, and it was there. I kept it because—" She shook her head slightly. "I don't know why I kept it. I told myself it was photographs. I'd already lost everything else. Something that might be photographs felt like something." "You never developed the film?" "I don't know if it's film." She finally pulled out the chair across from him and sat in it, placed the camera bag between them on the table. "I've never opened it. The casing is sealed differently than a regular camera. I noticed that years ago, but I left it alone. I kept it in a box with some other things. I brought it with me when I moved because it was the only thing I had left from before." Damien looked at the bag. Marcus had come back inside and was standing near the door to the kitchen, quiet. "The men watching the restaurant tonight," Damien said. "Have you seen them before?" "Not those two, but—" She paused. 8 months ago, a man came into the restaurant asking about the previous tenants of my apartment. He said he was from the county assessor's office. I checked. No one from the county assessor's office had made any inquiries about that building. You checked. I learned some things, she said with a flatness that told him the learning hadn't been comfortable. Over the years. Anyone else? A car that was parked on my block for 3 days in February. Maybe nothing. And she looked at the bag. And 6 weeks ago, someone broke into my apartment while I was at work. Nothing was taken, but things had been moved, small things. Things you'd only know were moved if you'd put them there yourself. They were looking for the camera. I didn't know that then. But you brought it with you when you ran tonight. Something moved across her face. Not quite embarrassment, more like the recognition of an instinct she hadn't fully interrogated. I always know where it is, she said. I don't know why. I always just know. Damien reached across and opened the bag. The camera was inside, leather case soft and worn, the brass fittings tarnished green-brown at the edges. He lifted it out carefully and set it on the table. It was heavier than it should have been. He turned it over, looked at the base. What should have been a standard film compartment latch was slightly different, recessed, with a secondary mechanism he could feel under his thumb but couldn't see. He looked up at Marcus. Marcus pulled his jacket open and produced a small toolkit from an interior pocket, because Marcus was the kind of man who carried a small toolkit the way other men carried their wallets. It took 4 minutes. When the false base of the camera separated from the main body, what came out was not film. It was a data module. Small, sealed in waterproof resin. The kind of thing that could survive water and time and a decade in a cardboard box and still hold whatever had been put inside it. It had a port on one end that Damien recognized as a proprietary standard he'd seen used by one specific category of people. Federal asset management, the kind used to secure evidence outside of official channels. He held it under the kitchen light and looked at it for a long moment. "What is it?" Evelyn said. "I don't know yet." He set it down, looked at Marcus. "Get Reyes on the phone. Tell him I need a reader for a DM7 module and I need it tonight." Marcus was already moving. Evelyn was watching Damien's face with the particular attention of someone who'd learned to read the thing underneath what people projected. "You know what it is," she said. "I know what kind of device it is." "That's not what I said." He looked at her. "Someone hid this at the Boston Pier the night of the Caruso execution. Someone who knew federal witnesses were going to start talking. Someone who needed insurance." "Insurance against what?" "Against the people above Caruso," Damien said. "The people Caruso was working for." She was still looking at him. And who were they working for? He picked up the module again, turned it over. The resin was yellowed slightly with age, but intact. Whoever had sealed this had sealed it to last. "That's what I need to find out," he said, "because if this is what I think it is..." His phone rang. He looked at the screen. The number was one he recognized, a Chicago number, one of 4 lines he kept active for specific people who would only call this number when the information was of a certain weight. He hadn't heard from this number in 11 months. He answered. "You need to leave the coast," said the voice on the other end. No greeting. A woman's voice, low and unhurried, with the specific cadence of someone who had learned to deliver bad news without inflection. "Right now, tonight." "Nadia." He kept his voice level. "What do you know?" "The contract on the woman isn't from outside your organization," Nadia said. "That's what I'm telling you. The order to move on her tonight, it came from inside. Someone in your inner circle put the call out." The kitchen was very quiet. Damien looked at Marcus. Marcus had stopped moving. "How sure are you?" Damien said. "Sure enough to call you on this number," Nadia said, "which I've never done before and which I hope to never do again." "Give me a name." "I don't have a name. I have a transfer record and a coded instruction string that I can trace back to a channel used by your inner circle for secondary communications." "Someone in your house, Damien. Someone close." The line went quiet for a moment. "There's more," Nadia said. He waited. "The module the woman is carrying," Nadia said. "Someone within your network has known about it for at least 6 months. Known she had it. Known where she was. And they didn't tell you." Damien set the module down on the table very carefully. Evelyn was watching him with dark eyes that had gone very still. "They've been managing it," Nadia continued, waiting for the right moment. The attack tonight wasn't about getting the module from her. It was about making sure she didn't have a chance to give it to anyone who could read it. A pause. Specifically, you. Nadia. I know. If someone in my circle has been running this, then everything you think you know about the last 6 months of your organization, Nadia said, is something someone else wanted you to think. The phone call ended. Damien stood in the kitchen of the safe house with the dead phone in his hand and the data module on the table in front of him, and Evelyn Cross watching him from across that table with an expression that was not satisfaction and was not grief and was not any simple thing he had a name for. She had been hidden for 10 years. The people who wanted her dead had been inside his house, and whatever was on the module, whatever financial records or testimony or evidence had been sealed in waterproof resin and hidden in a dead woman's camera for a decade, it was capable of something larger than bringing down a peer execution. It was capable of burning everything. Tell me what you're not telling me, Evelyn said. He looked at her across the table. She had her hands flat on the surface and her chin level and her eyes steady, and she looked like a woman who had been waiting 10 years to ask that question and had finally decided she was done waiting, and Damien Vale, who had spent a decade building something that he told himself was about power and turned out to have always been about one thing, opened his mouth to answer her. And that was the moment the safe house's exterior alarm tripped. All 3 panels on the security board above the kitchen door went red simultaneously. Not 1 entry point, not 2, all 4. The alarm panels didn't make a sound. That was the part that hit Damien first. Not the red lights themselves, but the silence behind them, because the system was designed to trigger an audible alert at the same moment as the visual, and the fact that there was no sound meant someone had already cut the exterior speaker line before tripping the sensors, which meant they'd been on the property longer than 30 seconds, which meant this wasn't a fast team moving in hot. This was a team that had been patient. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and hit the manual override on the security panel. The screen flickered and pulled up the exterior camera feeds, 4 quadrants, north, south, east, west, and 3 of the 4 were static. Dead. The east camera was still live, and what it showed was the gravel drive, the edge of the tree line, and 2 vehicles parked without lights where Cole had left the SUV. Cole's SUV was gone. Damien stared at that for 1 full second. Marcus? I see it. Where's Cole? Marcus already had his phone out. He dialed. They both listened to it ring 4 times and go to voicemail, and that told them everything that needed telling about where Cole was and what Cole had done with the 8 minutes he'd had alone outside with a running vehicle and a phone. Evelyn had stood up from the table. She was holding the camera bag against her side and watching Damien's face with a focus that was almost clinical, reading him the way you read a room when the room is the most important piece of information available. Back of the house, Damien said. There's a drop to the cove. 40 feet of trail, steep, comes out on a private dock. There's a boat. How old is the boat? Marcus said, which was a practical question dressed as a stupid one. Old enough. It runs. Damien was already moving, pulling Evelyn by the arm, not rough but definite, the grip of a man operating on the narrow margin between fast and reckless. Move. The back door opened onto a wooden deck that faced the ocean. The wind had picked up since they'd arrived, and it came off the water hard and cold, the kind that got into the gap between collar and jaw and stayed there. Below the deck, the bluff dropped away through a path cut into the rock, switchbacking down toward the cove. Damien could hear the water at the bottom. Not calm, tonight, but working. The sound of waves with some size to them hitting the dock pilings in irregular intervals. Marcus went first down the path with a flashlight he'd produced from somewhere, the beam kept low and tight. Evelyn went second. Damien went last, pulling the back door shut behind him and wedging the deck chair under the handle, which would slow nobody for more than 20 seconds. But 20 seconds was 20 seconds. He was 3 steps down the path when the back door of the cottage came open anyway. Not through the deck door, through the side entrance he'd forgotten about, the one that opened from the utility room, which meant they'd already been inside the structure itself when the exterior alarms tripped, which meant the alarm hadn't been a warning of approach. It had been a notification of arrival. The flashlight. Someone had seen the flashlight. "Run," Damien said. They ran. The path down the bluff was not built for running. It was built for a man walking carefully in daylight with one hand on the rope guide that had been bolted into the rock face at chest height. In the dark, with wind coming off the water and the rope guide invisible until Marcus's flashlight caught it, it was the kind of path that punished speed with twisted ankles and punished caution with the men coming down behind them. Evelyn stumbled once on a route that crossed the path, and Damien caught her arm and didn't break stride, and she didn't make a sound, just found her footing and kept moving. Behind them, voices. 2 of them. Not shouting, communicating, low and efficient, the language of people who'd practiced this and weren't wasting breath on anything unnecessary. The dock appeared out of the dark below them. 20 feet of weathered wood extending over black water, and tied at the end of it a Boston whaler that had seen better years but was sitting properly in the water and had, when Damien had last checked 14 months ago, a functional outboard engine and a quarter tank of fuel. Marcus hit the dock first and went straight to the engine. Evelyn was 2 steps behind him. Damien reached the bottom of the path and turned, putting his back to the water and his eyes on the bluff face above them. 2 shapes at the top of the path. One already starting down. He couldn't see their faces. He could see the outline of what the one in front was carrying, and it was not a handgun. It was longer, with the particular silhouette of a weapon that had a different purpose at a different range. They weren't rushing. The one with the long weapon had stopped at the top of the path and was settling into a stance. They didn't need to come down. They just needed a clean angle. "Marcus," Damien said, without turning, "now would be the time." The outboard engine turned over, coughed, and died. "Marcus." "I'm aware of the situation," Marcus said, with the calm of a man who understood that panic used fuel he didn't have. The shooter at the top of the bluff adjusted his position. The engine caught. It didn't catch well. It ran rough and too loud and sent a shudder through the boat that rattled the cleats. But it ran, and Marcus had the line off the cleat in the same second, and Damien stepped off the dock into the stern of the whaler as it was already pulling away from the dock, and the shot that came from the bluff above hit the dock itself 3 feet from where he'd been standing, punching a hole through the planking that disappeared into the black water below. The second shot went wide. Then they were in the cove's mouth, and the cove's rock walls were between them and the bluff, and the darkness swallowed them from the shooter's sight line, and the cold air and the engine noise were the whole world. Damien sat in the stern with his hands on the gunwale and breathed. Evelyn was in the bow facing him. Her hair had come loose from whatever had been holding it and was moving in the wind, and she had both hands gripping the side of the boat with the focused intention of someone who did not particularly like boats, but had made a decision about what she was and was not going to show right now. Marcus was running the engine from the center seat, watching the water, keeping them moving north along the coast away from the cove. Nobody spoke for 4 minutes. Then Evelyn said, "Cole." "Yes," Damien said. "How long has he been with you?" 3 years? She looked at him. The unspoken math of it was sitting between them. 3 years of proximity, 3 years of access. 3 years of a man who knew safe house locations and vehicle positions, and who knew, specifically, where Damien Vale had gone on a Tuesday night on the coast of nowhere, because he'd been the one driving. "Who else knew about the safe house?" Evelyn said. 4 people, Damien said. "Marcus, Cole, my logistics coordinator in Chicago, and 1 other. "Which other?" He didn't answer right away. The engine was loud enough that they had to speak at a certain volume, which was its own strange intimacy. Forced projection in the dark over open water. "His name is Raymond Voss," Damien said. "He's been my chief of operations for 9 years. Marcus was very still in the center seat. 9 years, Evelyn said. "Yes." "And you trust him?" "I trusted him," Damien said. Past tense, flat, the sound of a door closing on something that had been open a long time. He thought about what Nadia had said on the phone. A transfer record and a coded instruction string traceable to a channel used by his inner circle. Not a peripheral actor, not a recent recruit. Someone who had been inside the structure long enough to know which channels existed and how to use them without leaving the kind of trace that would show up in a routine audit. 9 years was long enough. 9 years was, in fact, exactly long enough. They made land 40 minutes north at a small marina that catered to recreational boaters and closed its office at 6. Damien had Marcus tie off the whaler at an empty slip at the far end of the dock, the kind of thing that would be noticed in the morning and cause mild irritation, but nothing more urgent than that. He paid for nothing and signed nothing, and they walked up the dock and through the empty marina parking lot and onto a county road that was dark and straight and went north toward a town Damien knew had a motel that accepted cash. The motel was called the Mariner's Rest. It had 11 rooms and a vending machine that dispensed things from a previous decade and a night manager who was watching something on a small television behind the desk and who processed Damien's cash with the incurious efficiency of a man who had learned not to ask about people who arrived at 11:30 at night on foot with wet shoes. Room 7. 2 beds, a bathroom, a window that looked onto the parking lot. Marcus sat on the edge of one bed and opened his laptop. His eyebrow had stopped bleeding but had dried dark against his skin, and he hadn't done anything about it. Evelyn sat in the single chair near the window and put the camera bag on the floor beside her feet. Damien stood in the middle of the room and looked at the data module in his hand. He'd been holding it since the cottage. He hadn't put it down. "Can you read it?" he said to Marcus. "I need a specific adapter. Reyes can get one to us by morning if we can tell him where we are." "Don't tell him where we are." Marcus looked up. "Reyes has been with you." "Don't tell him where we are," Damien said again, very calmly. Marcus closed his mouth and opened it again. "All right, I can find an adapter. There's a medical equipment supplier in Brunswick that stocks DM series hardware for archival systems. I can have it by 6 a.m. without going through anyone on our network." "Do that." Marcus started typing. Evelyn was watching Damien from the chair. "You already know what's on it," she said. "I don't." "You know enough." She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. "You've known enough since you saw the module. You've been doing math in your head since the kitchen, and you keep coming up with an answer you don't want." Damien looked at her. She was right, which was not something he was going to argue with at midnight in a motel room on the coast of Maine with wet shoes and a dead driver, and the entire architecture of what he'd spent 9 years building suddenly requiring re-examination. "The Caruso execution," he said. "The one you witnessed." "Yes." "The federal witness who was killed. His name was Thomas Greeley. He was a financial analyst who had worked for a consortium of organized crime families managing money through legitimate investment vehicles. He had decided to cooperate with a federal investigation into those financial networks." Damien paused. The investigation was focused not on the crime families themselves, but on the institutions facilitating them: banks, investment firms, government-adjacent financial entities. Evelyn was very still. "The execution was sanctioned to stop his testimony," Damien said. "Everyone assumed the order came from the Caruso family. The Carusos took the weight for it. 3 of their senior people went to federal prison. The investigation was effectively closed." "But," she said. "But the Carusos didn't order it," Damien said. "I know this because 2 years after the execution, a man who was present that night came to me. He wanted protection. He told me the order hadn't come from the Carusos. The Carusos had been used as cover. The real order had come from someone embedded in the consortium's financial structure, someone with enough reach to direct a hit and enough cover to let the Carusos absorb the consequence." "Who?" "He didn't know the name. He knew a channel, a specific coded communication pathway that the order had come through." Damien looked down at the module. "The same channel Nadia traced tonight." Evelyn sat back. "If Greeley was building a case against the financial network," she said slowly, "and he hid evidence before they killed him." "Then what's in this module isn't testimony," Damien said. "It's documentation, financial records, account structures, possibly identity information on the people at the top of the consortium who the Carusos were never connected to. People who are still active. People who have been active for the last 10 years operating under the assumption that Greeley's evidence died with him on Pier 11. The room was quiet except for the sound of Marcus's keyboard, and outside, the occasional sound of a car on the county road. "That's why they want it," Evelyn said. "That's why they've always wanted it. And that's why—" He stopped. She waited. "That's why someone inside my organization has been managing the situation," he said. Because if the module surfaces and gets read by the right people, it doesn't just expose the consortium. It exposes everyone who has been protecting them, everyone who has been on their payroll, everyone who had an interest in making sure Greeley's evidence stayed buried. He watched her face as she followed it. Your inner circle, she said. Some of it. Possibly. Voss? Possibly. She stood up from the chair, moved to the window, looked at the parking lot, empty, 4 light poles, a dumpster at the far end, and then turned back to face him. So when Nadia called and said the contract on me came from inside your organization, it wasn't about you, Damien said. It was never about you. You were the location of the module. That's all you've ever been to them. Something crossed her face that was not hurt. She'd moved past the register of hurt a long time ago, but was adjacent to it. The particular expression of someone learning that what they thought was personal was actually logistical. 10 years, she said. 10 years. I've been running for 10 years because of something inside a camera I didn't even know was a camera. Yes. She looked at the camera bag on the floor, then she looked at him. And you, she said, you've been building an empire for 10 years. All of this, Chicago, the organization, all of it. You told yourself it was for me. To get to me. It wasn't entirely. Was any of it actually for me, she said, or was it for you, because you needed something to be for? He didn't have an answer for that was entirely honest and entirely comfortable at the same time, so he said nothing. Evelyn nodded once. Not acceptance, more like confirmation of something she'd suspected. All right, she said. So what do we do? In the morning, when Marcus has the adapter, his phone, the secondary one, the number he'd given to no one tonight, it vibrated once on the nightstand where he'd set it down. A text. Unidentified number. He picked it up. The message was 6 words. Voss knows where you are now. Then, 3 seconds later, a second message from the same number. I'm sorry, I had no choice. It was signed with a single initial, C. Cole. Damien stared at the screen. Cole hadn't defected. Cole had been leveraged. There was a difference, and the difference mattered for the next 10 minutes because it told him something about the timeline and about what Cole still might or might not do. He read the message again. The apology was specific. The signature was voluntary. A man who'd fully burned his loyalty didn't send apologies and sign his name. Cole had given them the safe house location under duress. And then, from somewhere, at some risk, he'd warned them, which meant Voss had Cole, which meant Voss had known about this operation, which meant the question was not whether Voss was the source of the betrayal, but how deep the betrayal ran and who else was inside it. Marcus, Damien said, what's the range on our current exposure? Who in Chicago has access to my movement records for the last 72 hours? Marcus looked up from the laptop. His face had gone careful in the way it went careful when the information was not going to be comfortable. Voss manages the movement log, he said, but the log itself is accessible to 5 department heads. Give me the 5. Voss, Chen, Larkin, Dario Park, and... He stopped. And... Marcus closed the laptop. He looked at Damien with an expression that was something Damien had never seen on Marcus's face in 6 years, which was enough to tell him the answer before Marcus said it. Nadia, Marcus said. Nadia has access to the movement log. The motel room was very quiet. Damien looked at the phone in his hand. The call from Nadia. The warning that had come at exactly the right time, with exactly the right information, delivered in exactly the tone of a woman who needed him to trust what she was telling him. The call that had sent him scrambling into a defensive posture, pulling Evelyn close, making her feel like the threat was external, making him feel like the circle of trust was small and the enemy was outside it. Get him moving. Get him exposed. Get him to a location that could be fed forward. The safe house location hadn't come from Cole under duress. Cole's message was real. Cole had given up the location, yes, but the location hadn't been a secret in the first place. Someone had given the extraction team the safe house location before Cole had even been in a position to give it up. Nadia had called to make him run. The direction he ran was the information. He set the phone down on the nightstand. We have to move, he said. We just got here, Evelyn said. Nadia fed our position. Moving was what she needed us to do. He was already picking up the data module, already scanning the room for what was worth taking and what wasn't. She's been inside this from the beginning. The call was to make me trust her, to make me believe the threat was Voss, to make me isolate from my network and put myself somewhere trackable. Then who is it? Evelyn said. Her voice had gone very flat. If not Voss, if Nadia, it's both of them, Damien said. Voss and Nadia both, and possibly others. He looked at Marcus. Who else has that channel access? Marcus was very still. Marcus. The man who had been with him for 6 years, who had produced a first aid kit and a tool kit and a flashlight from a jacket that should not have been able to hold all three, who had driven east on the Harwick Service Road at exactly 4 miles over the limit and said nothing about Cole's disappearance until asked. That man sat on the edge of the motel bed and did not answer. And Damien Vale understood, in the particular way that a man understands something he has been refusing to understand for longer than he should have, that the betrayal was not 2 people deep. It was 3. Evelyn moved first. She stepped back from the window, putting the chair between herself and Marcus, and she did it smoothly enough that it looked like she was just shifting her weight. But Damien saw it, and Marcus saw it, and all 3 of them stood in the yellow light of the motel room, knowing exactly what was in the room with them, and no one reached for anything yet, because reaching was the thing that would end it before anyone was ready for it to end. Marcus sat with his hands on his knees. His face was doing something complicated. Not guilt, exactly, because guilt required a moment of decision, and the look on Marcus Teal's face was the look of a man who had made his decision a long time ago and had simply been waiting for the room to catch up. There was something almost like relief in it, the particular loosening of a person who has been holding a shape that wasn't theirs and has finally been allowed to stop. How long? Damien said. 4 years. 4 years. Damien heard his own voice come out very level. That was training. That was a decade of building the particular muscle that kept your voice level when everything underneath it was not. You came to me in year 2? Yes. So you were already inside it when you came to me? Yes. Damien nodded once. He looked at the module in his hand. He looked at the phone on the nightstand. He looked at the window and the parking lot beyond it, with its 4 light poles and its dumpster, and the county road that went north toward nothing in particular. The safe house, he said. You gave it to them before Nadia called. The call was to make you move, Marcus said. Yes, I gave them the location 2 hours before we arrived. And Cole? Cole genuinely panicked. His message to you was real. He didn't know I was part of it. A pause. He probably still doesn't. Evelyn was standing behind the chair near the window. She had not moved since she'd put the chair between herself and Marcus. She was watching Marcus with an expression that was not fear and was not anger, but was the kind of focused, cold attention that a person develops when they have learned that anger costs energy they might need for something else. What were you supposed to do? She said. Marcus looked at her. Get the module. Confirm the woman had it. Deliver both. Both, she said. Yes. Deliver me. Yes. To who? Marcus looked at Damien. Answer her, Damien said. Raymond Voss is the operational contact, but Voss answers to the consortium's financial director, a man named Elliot Crane. Marcus said the name carefully, the way you say a name when you've been careful about saying it for 4 years, and the habit of caution persists even when caution has stopped mattering. He's been the consortium's primary architect for 12 years. He's the one who ordered the Greeley execution. He's the one who's had people looking for the module ever since. And Nadia, Damien said, Nadia has been Crane's contact inside your network since before you hired her. She came in recommended by a channel you trusted. The recommendation was manufactured. Damien said nothing. He was thinking about 6 years of Nadia. 6 years of a woman who was sharp and reliable and who had called him on a specific emergency number at a specific moment to send him running in a direction that could be tracked. 6 years of building trust in increments, small accuracies, small demonstrations of loyalty, the slow accumulation of a reputation for being the person in the room who told the truth when it was uncomfortable. It was good work. He could appreciate it the way you appreciated craftsmanship, even when the craft had been used against you. Get up, he said. Marcus stood. Give me your phone, both of them. Marcus reached into his jacket, slowly, with both hands visible, and produced two phones and set them on the nightstand. The laptop. Damien, the laptop, Marcus. He set the laptop beside the phones. Damien looked at Evelyn. There's a gas station 3 miles north on this road. Open 24 hours. Go there, stay inside, don't talk to anyone, don't use a card. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She looked at Marcus. You're staying with him? Yes. That's 20 minutes, he said. I need 5 of them alone. She picked up the camera bag. She looked at Damien for a long moment with something in her eyes that was not quite trust, but was the closest adjacent thing to it. A decision made in the absence of better options that she was going to commit to fully, because committing fully was the only way it had a chance of working. Then she opened the motel room door, and the cold night air came in, and she walked out and the door swung shut behind her. Damien and Marcus stood in the motel room. Crane doesn't know you know about him, Damien said. As of tonight, his plan is still operational. He thinks the module is being extracted. He thinks Evelyn is being managed. He doesn't know Nadia's cover is burned. No, Marcus said. He doesn't know any of that. Then we have a window. Marcus was quiet. Tell me where Crane is, Damien said. Right now, tonight. Damien, you said 4 years. You came in because they had something on you, or because they paid you, or both. And I'm not going to ask which because it doesn't change what I need from you in the next 30 seconds, which is where Elliot Crane is right now. Marcus looked at him. There was something in his face that was working through a final calculation. The math of a man with no remaining good options, assessing which bad one was survivable. Whatever he'd been promised by the consortium, whatever arrangement had kept him functional for 4 years, it had a structural problem now. Damien Vale was standing in front of him, and Damien Vale knew, and the consortium's value proposition for Marcus had just collapsed. The Kessler Foundry, Marcus said, outside Brunswick. He's been using it as a secondary base for 6 months. It's where they planned to bring the module once it was extracted. How many people? Tonight? With the extraction in progress? Marcus thought. 20, maybe 25, plus Voss, plus Crane's personal security, which is 4 men who don't leave his side. Armed. Heavily. Damien picked up one of Marcus's phones and put it in his jacket pocket, left the other on the nightstand, left the laptop. He walked to the door and opened it, and the cold came in again. Marcus, he said, without turning. Yes. If you're not in this room when I get back, I'll know you made a choice, and I'll find you. He said it the way he said most true things, without emphasis, without heat, the way you state a physical law. Stay here. He walked out. The gas station was exactly 3 miles north. He found Evelyn inside under fluorescent lights, standing near the coffee station with a paper cup she wasn't drinking from, watching the door. She saw him come in, and something in her shoulders came down a degree. You didn't hurt him, she said. No. Why? Because I need him to stay in that room and think he made the right call. If I hurt him, he gets desperate. He moved past her to the far corner of the store, away from the window, away from the bored teenager behind the register who was back to watching something on his phone. Crane is at a foundry outside Brunswick. Voss is with him. 25 men, give or take. She stared at him. And you're... I'm going there. With what? With who? Myself. He looked at her steadily. And you, if you're willing. That's not... She stopped. You're serious. They have a window they think is open. Crane expects the module to arrive. He expects Evelyn Cross to arrive. I'm going to let him think that's what's happening for as long as it's useful, and then I'm going to close the window. There are 25 armed men. 25 men who are waiting for a delivery, not a fight. There's a difference in posture. You hit people who are expecting a delivery differently than you hit people who are expecting a fight. He watched her process it. I've done this before. I know you've done this before, she said. That's not the problem. What's the problem? She looked at him, looked at the paper cup in her hand, set it down on the counter of the coffee station. I identified the man giving orders at Pier 11, she said. The night of the Greeley execution. I saw his face. You told me. I didn't tell you who it was. He was still. I didn't know his name, she said. Not then. Not for years. But I saw his face. And I kept it. She touched her temple briefly. I kept it the way you keep something you know you're going to need. And 18 months ago, I saw him again. On a news broadcast. Local Brunswick news. A charity function. She looked up at him. His name is Elliot Crane. The gas station hummed. He gave the order on Pier 11, she said. I watched him. I can put him there. I can testify to that directly. I'm the only person still alive who was present and not on his payroll. Damien looked at her for a long moment. That's why the contract has been active for 10 years, he said. Not just the module. You. Both, she said. I'm both. I have the module and I can place him at the murder personally. As long as I'm alive, he can never be clean. Which means tonight he's not just trying to get the module, she said. He's trying to close the last open account. She met his eyes. Me. Outside, the county road was empty. A truck went by headed south, headlights sweeping across the gas station windows and moving on. The teenager behind the register had switched from his phone to a bag of chips. Damien took the data module from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. She looked at it. If something happens to me tonight, he said, that needs to reach a federal contact. Not local law, not state. Federal. Specifically the Financial Crimes Unit. There's a deputy director named Holt who has been trying to open the Greeley case for 7 years. Marcus has Holt's contact in the laptop. Use Marcus to get it. You trust Marcus now. I trust that Marcus is out of options and smart enough to know it. He kept his hand extended. Take it. She took it, held it in both hands, looked at it the way you look at something that has been the center of gravity for your entire life without your knowing it. I want to come with you, she said. I know. Don't tell me to stay somewhere safe. I'm going to tell you to stay somewhere useful, he said, which is different. You're the witness. You're the testimony. If Crane takes you, everything we have is still circumstantial. A module no one has read yet, and a man who might or might not hold up in a debrief. He held her gaze. But if you make it to Holt with that module intact, Crane is finished whether or not I come back from that foundry. She was quiet for a long moment. And if you don't come back, she said, then you finish it without me. Damien, Evelyn. She looked at him. He looked at her. 11 years of distance and silence, and a week ago he hadn't known she was standing on a dock in Harwick, bussing tables in the wrong size shoes. And now they were standing in a gas station on a county road at 1 a.m. with 25 armed men between them and anything that came after this, and there was nothing either of them could say that would be equal to any of it. She reached out and took his hand, held it for 3 seconds. Let go. Come back, she said. He left. The Kessler Foundry sat 3 miles outside Brunswick on a service road that had been private for 40 years. The main structure was a converted steel processing plant. 3 stories of reinforced concrete and rusted iron, dead for 20 years, reactivated for purposes that didn't appear in any public record. Damien sat in the car he'd taken from the motel parking lot, left unlocked, keys visible, belonging to someone who was going to be irritated in the morning, and looked at the building from a quarter-mile out. Lights on the ground floor. 2 vehicles outside the east entrance. A guard rotation he'd been watching for 8 minutes. 2 men on the east perimeter, pattern of 6 minutes between passes, which was slightly too long and indicated they expected company from outside rather than trouble from within. He was going in from the south. The south side had a loading dock that had been sealed when the foundry closed and unsealed recently. He could see the fresh marks on the doorframe where something had been cut away and replaced. Inside a sealed loading dock, there was no reason to maintain a guard rotation because the seal was the security, which meant there was probably 1 man on the interior side of that door, if that. He was out of the car and moving before he'd fully finished the thought. The south approach was open ground for 60 feet, and then shadow from the foundry's own bulk. He crossed the open ground at a run, low, and hit the shadow and stopped and listened. Wind. Somewhere inside, the sound of a generator. Voices, distant, from the east side of the building. The loading dock door had a standard padlock on a hasp. He had it open in 90 seconds with a pick set he'd taken from Marcus's jacket pocket during their conversation in the motel room because Marcus carried a toolkit, and Damien had learned years ago that the most useful thing about a well-prepared man was that his preparation was transferable. Inside, dark, vast, the smell of rust and old metal and machine oil, and beneath it something chemical that might have been cleaning solvent. The loading floor was concrete, cold, littered with debris that had been partially cleared, swept to the sides to create a walking path. High windows 20 feet up leaked the particular gray of a cloudy night, enough to see shapes but not details. One man, as predicted, sitting on a crate near the interior door with his back to the loading dock entrance, watching his phone, the blue light of the screen making him easy to locate and easy to approach and easy to take down quietly with an arm across the throat and pressure until the phone dropped and the man stopped moving. Damien lowered him to the concrete. He wasn't dead. He'd wake up with a headache and a story that didn't sound believable. He took the man's radio and his weapon and opened the interior door. The foundry floor was enormous, 40 feet of ceiling held up by iron trusses that had gone orange-brown with decades of oxidation. Catwalks ran the perimeter 15 feet up, connected by stairs at the four corners. The floor below had been cleared and arranged. Portable lights set up on stands, tables with equipment, a cluster of chairs around what looked like a tactical operations setup at the building's center. Men moving between positions, some with weapons visible, some not. At the center table, under the brightest of the portable lights, two men stood looking at something on a screen. One of them was Raymond Voss. Damien had known Voss for 9 years, had trusted him for 8 of those 9, had built an organizational structure with Voss at its operational core because Voss was precise and reliable, and had never in 9 years given Damien a reason to look at him the way Damien was looking at him now, from the shadow of a catwalk staircase 40 feet away. The other man was shorter, older, wearing a jacket that cost more than the motel room they'd just left. He was pointing at the screen with one finger, making a point, and Voss was nodding. The older man's face was in partial profile. Damien had never met Elliot Crane personally, but he'd seen photographs, and the photographs were accurate, and the man at the center table was the man in the photographs, and the man in the photographs was the man Evelyn Cross had watched, given execution order on a Boston pier 11 years ago on a rainy night when everything had gone wrong. Damien's hand was steady. His breathing was not quite. There was something working in his chest that was not fear and was not adrenaline exactly, but was older than either of them. The particular internal weather of a man standing at the end of a very long road, looking at the thing he's been moving toward without knowing it. He had one weapon. He had a radio that was going to be checked in the next rotation cycle. He had maybe 4 minutes before the man on the loading dock floor was discovered, and discovery would trigger a sweep, and a sweep would close every exit. He looked at the catwalk above the center table. He looked at the stairs. He looked at Elliot Crane's profile under the portable light, and he moved. He took the stairs fast and quiet, staying on the outer rail where the metal was thicker and less likely to flex and ring under weight. The catwalk above was narrow, 3 feet of grating with a pipe rail on one side, and it ran directly above the operations center, directly above the table, directly above the 2 men who were still looking at their screen and making their plans for a delivery that was never going to arrive. He was 12 feet above them when Voss looked up, not at the catwalk, at something else, some instinct or sound that made him raise his head, and for a half second his eyes moved across the ceiling trusses in a sweep that was almost casual, and then locked onto the catwalk with the precision of a man whose instincts had been the thing that kept him alive through 9 years of organizational work. Their eyes met. Voss opened his mouth. Damien dropped. He came off the catwalk rail and fell 12 feet and hit Voss across the shoulders, and they went down together onto the concrete foundry floor in a crash that brought every head in the building around. And Crane stepped back from the table, and the portable lights swung as the table went over and Damien was already up, pulling Voss up with him, one arm across Voss's throat and the weapon from the loading dock guard pressed against the side of Voss's skull. 20 men with weapons, all of them now oriented on him. "Nobody!" His voice carried in the foundry space, bouncing off iron and concrete. "Nobody moves!" Crane had stepped back 3 feet. His personal security had closed in around him. 4 men, exactly as Marcus had said, positioned in a tight perimeter. Crane himself was looking at Damien with an expression that was not fear. It was the expression of a man doing rapid calculation, assessing variables, determining how this new information changed the equation. "Damien Vale," Crane said. His voice was even, cultivated. The voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the right tone of voice was its own kind of leverage. "I've been wanting to meet you." "I know," Damien said. Voss was breathing hard against his arm, hands on Damien's forearm, not fighting yet. Smart enough to understand that not fighting was the only thing keeping him vertical. "The module," Crane said. "Where is it?" "Not here." "The woman." "Not here." Crane looked at him steadily. "Then what exactly," he said, "do you think this accomplishes?" Damien looked at the 20 men around him. He looked at Crane's 4 personal security personnel in their tight perimeter. He felt Voss's pulse hammering against his forearm. Fast, too fast. The pulse of a man whose calculation of his own survival had just shifted into uncertain territory. He felt something wet on his left side that he hadn't noticed until right now, in the stillness of the standoff. And when he pressed his elbow against it, he understood that one of the shots in the Foundry approach, or possibly on the dock, or possibly in the alley behind Carver's catch, some point in the last several hours that had been too fast to register, had grazed him along the ribs, and the warmth spreading under his jacket was blood, and it had been spreading for a while. "What does this accomplish?" Damien said, and his voice was still level because the muscle that kept it level had not failed him yet. He looked directly at Elliot Crane. "This is me giving you a choice," he said. "One time, right now." He felt the blood under his jacket, felt the specific kind of lightheadedness that came from losing more of it than was ideal. He felt 20 weapons pointed at him, and the cold iron air of the Foundry and Voss's pulse and his own, and he held Crane's eyes across the overturned table and the scattered equipment and the portable lights that threw everything in sharp relief and hard shadow. "Surrender the records," he said. "All of them. Every account, every transaction, every name. To federal authorities, tonight." He tightened his arm across Voss's throat slightly. "Or I make sure the module reaches Deputy Director Holt before morning, with enough corroborating testimony to bury every name on it, including yours, and something you will never dig yourself out of." Crane looked at him. Around them, the Foundry was perfectly, dangerously still. And Crane smiled. It was a small smile, precise. The smile of a man who had just found the specific crack in the wall he'd been looking for. "The testimony," Crane said. "You mean the woman." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a phone. Turned it so Damien could see the screen. A live feed. Security camera quality, slightly grainy but clear enough. A gas station interior, fluorescent lights. A coffee station. A woman in a blue uniform with an embroidered anchor, hands zip-tied in front of her, being walked toward the exit by 2 men Damien had never seen before. "She made a phone call from the gas station," Crane said pleasantly. "We've had the county cell towers flagged for her voice pattern for 8 months. He pocketed the phone. "The module without the testimony is circumstantial. You said so yourself, I imagine." He tilted his head slightly. "So, let's talk about what you're actually willing to trade." Damien looked at the phone that was no longer visible. He looked at Crane's face. He felt the blood under his jacket and the weight of Voss against his arm, and the 20 weapons and the 4 personal security men and the space between him and the door and everything. Not because he'd run out of options. Not because the weapon in his hand had stopped being useful. He let Voss go because holding Voss was a posture, and postures only worked when the other person believed in them. And Elliot Crane was a man who had spent 12 years learning to identify the exact moment when a posture became a bluff. The phone with the live feed had changed the geometry of the room. Holding Voss's throat was leverage against men who cared whether Voss lived. Crane was not that kind of man. Voss stumbled forward when Damien released him, catching himself on the overturned table, breathing hard. He turned and looked at Damien with something complicated on his face. Not relief, because relief would have required a moral simplicity that Voss had surrendered 4 years ago, but something close to the expression of a man who had not expected to still be standing. Damien lowered the weapon. Not dropped it, lowered it. His arm came down to his side and his hand stayed closed around the grip, and he looked at Crane across the foundry floor with 20 men between them and the particular steadiness of someone who had just made a decision that looked like surrender and was not. "You want to trade," Damien said. "I want the module," Crane said, "and I want the woman's cooperation. In exchange, everyone in this room goes home. You included." He said it the way a man says something that both of them know is a lie, but that has to be said anyway for the negotiation to proceed. It was the language of men who had been in enough rooms to know that certain words were placeholders, not promises. "Call them off," Damien said. "The men at the gas station. Call them off and bring her here." Crane considered him. "Why would I do that?" "Because if she's not standing in this room in 20 minutes, the module has already been transmitted." Damien watched Crane's face. "You've had cell towers flagged for her voice pattern for 8 months. Good. Then you know she made 2 calls from that station, not 1. The first one you caught. The second one was on a number you don't have flagged because it belongs to a federal deputy director who has been waiting for this specific call for 7 years. The foundry was very quiet. "She transmitted from the gas station," Damien said, "before your people got to her. The module's contents are already in federal hands. Killing her now doesn't bury anything. It adds a body to a file that's already open." He kept his eyes on Crane's. "But if she's alive and unharmed, and I can put her in front of Holt personally, there's a version of this where the testimony is complicated, where the chain of evidence has problems, where things take years to prosecute, and during those years, careful men with careful lawyers can do things." He let that sit. "Kill her, and that version doesn't exist." Crane looked at him for a long time. Behind him, the 4 personal security men were statues. "You're bluffing," Crane said. "Maybe," Damien said. "You want to find out." Another silence. Somewhere above them, a joint in the foundry roof expanded in the cold and made a sound like a rifle crack that made 3 of the 20 men flinch. Crane didn't flinch. Damien didn't flinch. Crane reached into his jacket. Not for the phone, for a radio. He said 2 words into it. "Stand down." Then he looked at Damien. "She'll be here in 10 minutes. "Good," Damien said. "Now," Crane said, and something shifted in his voice. The pleasantness was still there, but what was under it came up a degree. The way cold water comes up through ice when the ice is thin enough. "The module. When she walks in that door." Crane nodded once, looked at Voss. Voss had moved away from the overturned table and was standing slightly to the side, hands at his sides, a man who had become furniture in his own scene. Crane looked back at Damien with the expression of a man filing away information, categorizing it, planning. Damien was aware of the blood under his jacket. He was aware of it the way you become aware of a sound that's always been there once someone points it out, suddenly present, suddenly impossible to ignore. His left side was wet from the lower rib to the hip, and the lightheadedness he'd felt before had not gotten worse, but had also not gotten better, and he understood that he had a specific amount of functional time and that he was going to need to be precise about how he used it. 8 minutes passed. Then the east door opened. Evelyn walked in with her hands zip-tied in front of her and 2 men behind her, and she walked the way she'd walked across the gas station parking lot and down the alley behind Carver's Catch and down the bluff path in the dark. Controlled, forward-leaning, the particular posture of a woman who had decided what she was not going to show. She saw Damien across the foundry floor, and her eyes went to his face first and then to his left side, and she saw what was there, and her expression didn't change, but something behind it did. She looked at Crane. "You," she said. Crane looked at her with the mild interest of a man examining something he'd heard described many times, and was finally seen in person. "Ms. Cross," he said. "Or is it Bennett now?" "I know your face," she said. "I've known your face for 11 years. "Yes," Crane said. "That has been something of an inconvenience." One of the men behind her cut the zip ties. Her hands came free, and she rolled her wrists once and let them drop to her sides. Damien looked at her. She looked at him. The look said several things that they didn't have words for and weren't going to find in this room with 20 weapons and Elliot Crane watching them like they were a transaction being processed. "The module," Crane said to Damien. Damien reached into his jacket pocket. His hand came out empty. He looked at it as though surprised. Then he looked at Evelyn. She reached into the camera bag still hanging from her shoulder. They hadn't taken it, an oversight or an indifference, and produced the data module and held it up in the foundry light. "I'll give it to you," she said to Crane, "on one condition." Crane looked at her with something approaching amusement. "You're not in a position—" "You answer a question," she said. "One question, truthfully. Then I give it to you." Crane studied her. The amusement remained. He was a man who could afford to be amused by things that didn't threaten him, and Evelyn Cross in a gas station uniform with a 10-year-old camera bag did not, in Elliot Crane's assessment, constitute a threat. "Ask," he said. "Thomas Greeley," she said. "The man you had killed on Pier 11. Did he have a family?" Something moved through the room, not sound, the absence of it. Even the men who'd been holding their weapons with professional boredom seemed to go slightly stiller. Crane looked at her. "A wife?" he said after a moment. "2 daughters. Did they know what happened to him?" "They were told it was an accident," Crane said. "A drowning." "His wife," Evelyn said. "Is she still alive?" "I have no idea," Crane said. "I don't keep track of—" "Her name was Patricia," Evelyn said. "She's alive. She lives in Somerville. She's been living with the official story for 11 years. She held up the module. "She's going to know the truth. That's the condition. Not the module, not you, her. She gets to know what actually happened to her husband and why." She held Crane's eyes. "That's what I want." Crane looked at her for a long moment. "That's a remarkably small thing to ask." "It's the only thing I want from you," she said. "The module is yours." She held it out. Damien said, "Evelyn." She said, "I know." She threw the module, not to Crane, sideways, hard, toward the concrete wall to Crane's left, and it hit the wall and the resin casing cracked, and the internal components scattered across the foundite floor in pieces. And in the half-second that every eye in the foundry followed the arc and impact of the module, Evelyn's hand went into the camera bag and came out with a phone, and she hit send on something she'd already typed, and the phone's screen went dark. The room erupted. Crane's voice, the pleasantness gone, something raw beneath it. "Take them." Damien moved. He was across the distance between himself and Crane's personal security in 4 steps, which was too far and too fast for a man who'd been losing blood for 2 hours, and he knew it, and moved anyway, because the calculus had changed the moment the module hit the wall, and the only math that mattered now was staying between Crane and Evelyn for as long as it took. The first security man he hit at the shoulder, driving him sideways into the second, buying a half-second of tangled footing. The second man recovered fast and was good, technically good, trained, the kind of movement that came from real instruction. And he caught Damien across the jaw with something that rattled the lights and sent him sideways into a support column. He held onto the column. His left side screamed. "Don't kill him," Crane said from somewhere behind the security perimeter. Cold, precise. "I want him on his feet." The third security man came around Damien's right and got an arm around his throat from behind. And the fourth had the weapon up, and Damien could see Evelyn across the foundry floor, 2 of the 20 men moving toward her, and she was backing away from them toward the east wall, and her eyes found his, and he saw her make the same calculation he'd just made, the one that had nothing comfortable in it. She stopped backing up. She said loudly, clearly, to the foundry ceiling, "Federal agents, this building is active. We are inside." Silence. Then from outside, from multiple points outside, from the east and south and what sounded like the roof access, the sound of vehicles and doors and boots, and the particular compressed shout of law enforcement announcing itself that Damien had heard twice before in his life and had hoped not to hear a third time. The east door came in, not the handle. The door itself, frame and all, pushed by something hydraulic that the men coming through behind it used precisely once and then set aside. They came in wearing vests and helmets and with weapons at a different level of serious than anything currently inside the building. And they came in from 3 directions simultaneously, and the 20 men who'd been watching Damien and Evelyn with their weapons ready did the math in roughly 1 second and set those weapons down. Damien felt the arm around his throat loosen. He didn't move immediately. He stood against the column with his hand pressed to his left side and breathed and waited for the room to settle into whatever shape it was going to settle into, because moving too early in a room that was still resolving itself was how people who'd survived everything else got hurt at the finish. Crane was still standing at the center of the foundry floor. He hadn't moved. His 4 security men had their hands up. Voss was against the far wall with his eyes on the ground. Crane himself was looking at Evelyn with an expression that had gone through several things and arrived at something that was almost, in its particular way, impressed. "The second call," Crane said. "From the gas station," Evelyn said. "Yes." "Holt." "He's been waiting a long time for this," she said. "He was ready." Crane looked at the agents moving through his foundry. He looked at the men with their hands up. He looked at Voss, who was not going to be useful to him now, and they both knew it. He looked at the cracked resin of the data module on the floor and the scattered components around it, and something in his expression shifted. Not collapse, not yet, but the first internal adjustment of a man accepting that a structure he'd built over 12 years had just become weight. He looked at Damien. "The module," he said. "The contents." "Were transmitted," Damien said. "From this location, 20 minutes ago, before she was picked up at the gas station." He watched Crane's face. "The physical module was insurance. The data was already gone." Crane was quiet for a moment. "You didn't know that for certain," he said, "when you came in here." "No," Damien said. "I didn't." Crane looked at him with something that was not quite respect and was not quite anything else with a name. Then a federal agent was beside him with his hands being guided behind his back, and Elliot Crane, who had ordered executions and managed financial networks and buried evidence for 12 years, went without resistance. He went the way men go when they've assessed the situation completely and found no remaining angle. Precisely. Without theater. Damien slid down the column until he was sitting with his back against it and his legs out in front of him on the foundry floor. Evelyn was beside him before he'd fully settled. She crouched down and looked at his left side, and her hands moved to his jacket, and he let her open it, and she looked at what was there without flinching, which told him what he'd already suspected about what the last 10 years had taught her about things that were difficult to look at. "It's not as bad as it feels," he said. "It's bad enough," she said. "I've had worse. That's not the reassurance you think it is." He almost smiled. It pulled at something that hurt. Did Holt have enough? He had the transmission. He had everything on the module, and she reached into the camera bag and produced a small recording device, the kind that was small enough to sit in the base of a bag without being noticed. "He has this. Everything Crane said in this room." She looked at him. "I've been recording since the gas station, since before they picked me up." She paused. "I learned some things over the years." He looked at the recorder, then at her face. Crane confessed to Greeley on tape. "He confirmed it," she said. "There's a difference, legally, but Holt says it's enough." She held the recorder in both hands. "Patricia Greeley is going to know." He looked at her. The foundry around them was full of movement. Agents processing men, voices calling clear, equipment being documented. And in the middle of it, they were a still point. 2 people sitting on a concrete floor surrounded by the end of something that had been a long time ending. "You knew the module was already transmitted," he said. "I sent it from the gas station before they got to me. Before the first call, actually." "And you walked in here anyway." "You were in here," she said simply. He didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure one was required. An EMT reached them then. 2 of them, efficient and professional, and they opened his jacket the rest of the way and started doing the things that needed doing, and Damien sat with his back against the column and let them work. The pain was clarifying now, the specific kind that came when adrenaline stepped back and let you feel what it had been covering for. He breathed through it. Evelyn sat beside him on the concrete, her shoulder against his arm, close enough that he could feel her breathing. Voss was walked past them in handcuffs by a federal agent who looked young enough to be surprising. Voss didn't look at them. He looked at the floor with the expression of a man going somewhere he had known for 4 years he was eventually going to go. And there was nothing in his face except a kind of exhausted arrival. Cole was brought in through the east door 20 minutes later, not in cuffs, but with 2 agents flanking him and a look on his face like a man who'd been awake for 30 hours. and had made enough bad decisions in the last 12 of them to last the rest of his life. He stopped when he saw Damien against the column and the EMTs and the blood, and he opened his mouth and closed it, and opened it again. "I tried to warn you," he said. "I know," Damien said. I didn't know about Marcus. I didn't know how far—" "Cole," Damien looked at him. "Talk to Holt. Tell him everything you know. Don't negotiate. Don't manage it. Just tell him." He held Cole's eyes. "That's the only thing that helps you now." Cole nodded. The agents moved him along. Nadia was taken from a hotel in Brunswick at 4 in the morning. Damien wasn't there for it. He was in a hospital in Brunswick by then, in a room with a window that looked onto a parking lot and a fluorescent light that buzzed at a frequency that would have been maddening under other circumstances, and which he barely noticed. The wound was a through and through along the lower left ribs. It had missed everything important by a distance that a surgeon described as significant in a tone that suggested she had a more colorful private assessment. 3 hours of work. Drainage, suture, the standard warning about rest and infection, and activity levels that was delivered with the specific resignation of a medical professional who could tell the patient was not going to follow it. Evelyn was in the waiting room when they brought him out. She was still in the uniform. She'd never had a chance to change, and the blue polyester with the embroidered anchor looked exactly as wrong in the hospital waiting room as it had everywhere else tonight, and she was sitting in one of the plastic chairs with the camera bag in her lap and a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold and her eyes were closed. They opened when he came through the door. She looked at him for a moment, at the bandaging visible under the hospital gown, at the IV port still taped to his hand, at his face which he suspected looked like exactly what it was. "Don't say anything reassuring," she said. "I wasn't going to." She stood, held the coffee cup, looked at it and then at the trash can 6 feet away and dropped it in from where she was standing. It went in. She looked back at him. "Holt wants a statement," she said. "Both of us. Tomorrow." "What time?" 10. "Here. He's sending someone." "All right." She sat back down. He sat beside her in the plastic chairs and the fluorescent light buzzed, and outside the window, the parking lot was doing what parking lots do at 4 in the morning, which was nothing. A nurse passed the door. Somewhere down the hall, a machine made its periodic sound. "I thought about this," she said, not looking at him, looking at the window and the dark parking lot beyond it. "A lot of times, over the years, I thought about what I'd say. If I ever, what I'd actually say. You don't have to. I'm going to." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I was angry for a long time. I was angry in the way that becomes structural, like it holds things up, and I'm not going to tell you that's gone. I don't know yet what's gone. I know tonight happened, and I know what you did, and I know what it cost, and I know—" She stopped, started again. "I know you've been carrying this for 10 years. So have you," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "We've both been carrying the same thing in different directions for 10 years. He looked at her. She was 41 years old and had a scar along her jaw and shorter hair than he remembered, and she was wearing a uniform that belonged to a life she had built in a coastal town under a name that wasn't hers, and she was the most real thing in the room, the most real thing, he suspected, in a very large radius. "I'm not going back to Chicago," he said. She was quiet. "What you said in the motel," he said, "about whether the empire was for you or for me. The answer is that it stopped being about anything real somewhere around year 4. I kept building because I didn't know how to stop, because stopping meant sitting with what had happened, and He stopped. I wasn't ready to sit with it. "Are you ready now?" "I'm sitting in a hospital at 4 in the morning with a hole in my side that a federal surgeon described as significant," he said. "I think I'm out of the option of not being ready." She was quiet for a moment. Then something happened at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. Small, involuntary, the kind that happens before a person has decided whether they're going to allow it. "They're going to want to know what you're going to do," she said, "with the organization, with everything you have in Chicago." "I know." "What are you going to do?" He thought about it. Not for long. He'd been thinking about it since the foundry floor, since the moment he'd sat against the column and felt the ground under him and understood that the structure he'd built over a decade had been undermined from inside and was not worth the cost of rebuilding. "Dissolve it," he said. "The parts that can be dissolved legally, I'll dissolve. The assets that can be liquidated clean, I'll liquidate. The rest—" He paused. "Holt is going to want cooperation on the financial network. The consortium had reach beyond Crane. I know things that would take them years to find without me. You're going to cooperate with federal investigators. I'm going to have a very complicated 6 months," he said. "Yes." She sat with that. Outside, a car pulled into the parking lot and its headlights swept the window and moved on. The fluorescent light buzzed. The hall was quiet. "There's a lawyer in Boston," Evelyn said. "I met her 3 years ago. She does federal cooperation agreements. She's very good." "You met a federal cooperation lawyer 3 years ago." "I had a lot of time to think about contingencies," she said. "I've been carrying a camera with evidence in it for 11 years. I was aware there might eventually be a situation." He looked at her. "You've been planning for this." "I've been planning for the possibility," she said. "Planning for a thing and wanting it to happen are different." She looked down at her hands again. "I mostly wanted to just keep being Claire Bennett in Harwick and not have any of this be real." "I know. I was good at it too." She looked at the window. "Walt is going to be furious about the restaurant. The damage. And because I'm not going to be there for the breakfast shift." A pause. "He's going to have to explain to the health inspector why there are bullet holes in the dining room." He almost laughed. It pulled at the wound, which was a useful reminder to keep breathing carefully. The months that followed were not simple. They were not going to be simple, and no one who had been in that foundry had any illusion that they would be. Federal proceedings moved the way federal proceedings move. Slowly, with repetition, with the specific bureaucratic weight of institutions processing things at institutional speed. Damien gave Holt everything he asked for and several things he hadn't known to ask for, and the cooperation was genuine and the legal complications were extensive, and there were 6 months where the outcome was unclear enough that the Boston lawyer earned every dollar of her fee. Nadia pleaded. Voss negotiated. Cole testified, and the testimony was complete, and the deal he received in exchange was modest but survivable. Marcus Teal went to trial, and the trial was not short. Raymond Voss received a sentence that accounted for 9 years of proximity to power and 4 years of active betrayal. Elliot Crane's trial lasted 11 weeks and resulted in convictions on 8 federal counts, including the Greeley execution, which was reclassified from accidental drowning to first-degree murder, which was the classification it had always deserved. Patricia Greeley sat in a federal courtroom on the 4th day of testimony and learned what had happened to her husband on Pier 11 in Boston 11 years before. She learned it from Evelyn Cross, who had been on the dock that night and had spent a decade carrying the weight of what she saw. Patricia Greeley was 63 years old and had raised 2 daughters on the official story and the particular grief of not knowing. She was not grateful. Gratitude was not the right word for what moved across her face when she heard the truth. It was closer to the expression of someone who has been holding their breath for 11 years and has finally been allowed to exhale. Not relief exactly, because the exhale didn't bring back what was lost, but something being set down, something being given its right shape. Evelyn met her in the hallway after and said very little because very little was what was needed, and Patricia Greeley looked at her for a long moment and said, "Thank you for not letting it stay buried." That was all. It was enough. The Damien Vale who walked out of the federal courthouse in Boston 9 months after the foundry was not the man who had walked into a seafood restaurant in Harwick looking at a waterfront property. He was thinner. He moved more carefully. He had a scar along his lower left side that tightened when the weather changed, and that he'd been told would always do that. The organization in Chicago had been dissolved in the way that things are dissolved when a man decides that the alternative is letting them collapse on their own, which has more casualties. Some things had gone cleanly, others had not. He did not allow himself to pretend that clean was the only word for it. He didn't go back to Chicago. He went to Harwick. Carver's Catch had been closed since the night of the shooting. Walt had submitted insurance claims that were still being processed through a bureaucracy that had questions about the precise nature and origin of the damage to the dining room and the dock. Walt himself had driven to the hospital the morning after and sat in the waiting room and eventually been told that Claire Bennett was not there, which was true, because Claire Bennett had never been her name. He'd driven home and reopened the kitchen for locals and put a sign in the window that said "Dining Room Temporarily Closed," and left it at that. When Damien Vale walked into Carver's Catch on a Tuesday afternoon in the first week of October, Walt looked at him across the bar with the expression of a man who had a great many questions and had decided, over 9 months of waiting, to ask none of them. "Coffee?" Walt said. "Please," Damien said. He sat at the bar and Walt put coffee in front of him, and they sat in the kind of silence that is not uncomfortable. That is, in fact, the specific silence of two men who have understood something about each other without discussing it. Evelyn came in from the kitchen 20 minutes later. She was not in uniform. She was in her own clothes, jeans, a gray sweater that was slightly too large in the shoulders, the kind of comfortable imprecision of a person dressing for themselves rather than for the requirements of someone else's image of her. She had the camera bag over her shoulder, which surprised him for a moment until he understood that some habits don't break overnight, that some things stay close even after they've been emptied of their danger. She looked at him. He looked at her. Walt took his coffee cup and moved to the far end of the bar with the discreet efficiency of a man who had been in the service industry long enough to know when other people needed space. "You didn't call ahead," she said. "I wasn't sure what I'd say on the phone." She sat down on the stool beside him, not across from him, beside him. She looked at the scarred wood of the bar top and at the empty dining room through the interior doorway and at the fishing photographs still on the right wall, the black and white boats and the dock workers, and the lighthouse in the fog. "I bought the property," he said. She looked at him. "The pier," he said. "The building. Walt's lease is already paid 3 years forward. Walt doesn't know that yet." He looked at the bar. "The dining room needs work. The pier needs more than work. The support beams are—" "Damien." "Yes." "Why did you buy it?" He looked at the photographs on the wall. He looked at the empty tables in the dining room and the light coming through the windows that were new, replaced since the shooting, the glass still slightly too clear, not yet fogged by salt air. He looked at the woman sitting beside him, who had been Claire Bennett in this place for longer than she'd been Evelyn Cross anywhere, and who was something else now that had not found its name yet, and who was looking at him with dark eyes that contained all of the above and more. "Because it's yours," he said. "Whatever you want it to be, whatever you want to do with it. I'm not—" He stopped. "I'm not here to bring you somewhere. I'm not here to rebuild anything that was. I know what I was. I know the cost of it, and I'm not asking you to pretend it had no cost." He looked at her directly. "I'm here because this is where you are, and I have nowhere better to be." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sea was doing what the sea does at this latitude in October. Working, gray-green, unhurried, the kind of movement that has been going on long enough to have no memory of stillness. A gull landed on the new railing of the dock and looked at the water and flew off. "The dining room," she said. "If it's going to reopen, the floors need refinishing." "I know. And the kitchen ventilation is inadequate. Walt's been working around it for years. I'll get someone. The pier is going to take 6 months minimum." "I know." She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them on the bar there was nothing. No module, no weapon, no camera, no decade of silence. Just the scarred wood and 2 cups of coffee that had gone lukewarm. "You can stay at the inn on Harbor Street," she said, "while the work is being done." "All right, it's not cheap. I have some money left." Something moved through her expression, through the geography of old anger and older love and everything that had grown up between them in the space of 10 years of absence, and arrived at a place that had no easy name, which was fine, because not everything needed one. She picked up her coffee, took a sip, set it down. "The floors first," she said, "before anything else." "The floors first," he agreed. He didn't put a ring on the table that day. He didn't put anything on the table except his hands, which he set flat on the scarred wood beside hers, close but not touching, the particular proximity of 2 people beginning something at the only speed that mattered, which was the right one. The light through the new windows was thin and honest, October light, the kind that doesn't flatter anything and doesn't try to. Walt, at the far end of the bar, poured himself a coffee. Outside, the sea moved. The gull came back to the railing and stayed this time.